Well, good evening, folks. Coming from the studios in Brisbane with Radio FM 88 Australia. Of course, at this time of the night on a Thursday, we go simulcast with our co-host in the UK, none other than Priti Pauline, and and our guest tonight, and I'm going to say this morning as well, is also from the UK. And so, without further ado, I'll just do a big cheerio to Priti. Hello.
Hello, and cheerio to you too. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for the introduction there. And I'd like to introduce you to Sukh Singh, who I met some 5 years ago, I think it was, the day before my dad's birthday. And I asked him if he'd like to come and talk about the work that he's been doing. And he chose the title, Grounding Infinite Love and Consciousness in a Finite Life. So welcome, Sukh. I'm delighted to see you.
Thank you.
Take it away.
It's a delight to be here.
Tell us a little bit about everything.
I started off life as going through the usual channels of going to university and getting a job in the corporate world, operated around the IT and strategic management space, and ended up becoming a troubleshooter in organizations which were underperforming, or we're going through large-scale change like merger acquisitions, breaking into new markets. So some of that work was things like working for the BBC, working for central government, working for AI agencies, people that supplied the World Economic Forum and other bits and pieces. So I had quite a bit of a hands-on experience of seeing the virtual and literal cage that people talk about on a number of your shows being built. Always had an understanding that the world had various aspects to it, geopolitics, global corruption, the military-industrial complex. But it wasn't until Brexit really that I started to make the connection between sort of infinite love and consciousness and the creator, and how that sort of is distilled, if you like, down into natural law and the way that that's been manifest and expressed over the millennia down here on Earth. So that's really the background over the last 6 years now, since sort of the lockdown period at the end of 2019. My main focus has been to take the kind of skill sets that are used in the corporate world around critical thinking, analysis, awareness, troubleshooting, having a look at structural and organizational processes, and starting to apply those to the way that our nations are run in terms of national governance. So going into natural law constitutions, common law constitutions, and then also how we do that on an individual level and a group level, whether that's our village or our local community or collective. So that's been the main push over the last 6 years, really, as the tyranny has started to tighten the net globally, has really been looking at how we start to express that down here.
Okay, cool. And so when you talked about a virtual and a literal cage, how do you distinguish between the two of them?
So
they're both cages.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, the literal cage, if you like, is where we can see the tightening around things like lockdowns, going into your 15-minute cities. I think Sandy Adams, who previous guest, will have gone through bits and pieces like the Agenda 2030, what was 2015 became 2030, and so on and so forth. And then the sort of the virtual cage, if you like, being a mix of that psychological aspect of people almost imprisoning ourselves through conditioning, brothers and sisters out there in the various nations, dancing to the tune of legal fictions as though it's their literal physical selves being processed as commodities. So there's two aspects to it, really. There was the practical, we can see around us something's happening, and then there's that kind of invisible aspect where we almost project back onto ourselves a manifestation of being enslaved through the way that we frame our own lives and the way that we frame the opportunities and challenges that the establishment present us with us on a day-to-day basis, from parking fines, speeding tickets, all the way through to national taxes, income tax, council tax, and debt collectors and bailiffs at the doors.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds pretty oppressive. So, how would you begin a process with somebody to uncondition them and see the legal world as a fictional world? How would you go about doing that?
It's been an interesting journey, I think, because it's always in my role in the corporate world. I always try. My job was really between the more complex technical architects and innovation geniuses, if you like, and having to distill that down into sort of Fisher-Price
Yep,
language for middle management
surprise language.
yeah, and the boardroom and stuff, or Tonka truck language, depending on which nation you're in.
Okay,
Um,
I get it.
and so, really, I found that over the last 2 years, I sort of started from a perspective. It doesn't matter who you think the creator is or what creative force put us here, whether you believe in a higher being or whether you're an atheist. And there's a lot of atheists within the truth movement I've come across who don't believe in the creator, don't believe in constitutions. But in the material realm, if you ask anybody, ultimately, in this realm that we're in now, in our daily lives, there's only 3 ways that we can be attacked.
Yeah.
One is our physical bodies. Someone can attack you. If I was in front of you, I can, physically attack you. There's psychological attack, your mind, your ideology, your thought process, your peace of mind, the sense of being able to attain justice in courts, for example, or having extrapolated court cases is a form of psychological injury and harm where your justice is delayed. And then your property. Someone can take your property, they can fine you, they can take money off you out of your bank accounts, they can steal your stuff. And so it doesn't matter what politics you're into, what religion or faith you're into, whether you believe in something or don't believe in something. At a hard physical level, there are only three ways that we can be attacked. And so normally when you start to have just a pub discussion, if you like, discussion in a bar, that sort of usually opens it up, and people realize, well, or even in the truth movement, whether it's 5G that upsets people, whether it's taxation, whether it's just automated speeding fines, whatever it is, it comes down to an attack on your mind, your body, your property, or a combination of those 3. And so that sort of breaks it down at an initial level, and then you then say, okay, well, if there are 3 ways of being attacked, then how they're almost 3 divine gifts, if you like, of this physical manifestation that we have. The blood flows, the flesh lives, and these 3 aspects are how we sort of express ourselves. Sort of keeping the metaphysical to one side for the moment in terms of emotion and love and the other stuff. And then how do you protect those? Both at a personal level as an individual. So, if someone comes into your house and tries to take these things, or someone comes into your personal realm, and then extrapolate it up at a sort of village level, town level, county level, and at the highest sort of level that we operate within our own tribes is at a national level. And if we have a look, often in the common law, I'm sure a lot of your speakers may have spoken about it before or mentioned it, we have the notion of no loss, no harm, no injury. So a lot of we sort of use that as a bit of a cliche, but if we break it down, it's quite in depth, because it's no loss of property, no harm to mind, and no injury to body. So the no loss, no harm, no injury pertains to the 3 ways in which we can be attacked, or the 3 gifts which we've been given can be harmed. And so if we have a look at what that means in the common law sense, because obviously in Latin, nowhere in the constitutions or the Magna Carta does it just say no loss, no harm, no injury. That's a sort of distilled implication of the fact that we have the right to bear arms, protects our bodies in the immediate. I always say, even if you've got a little lady in a wheelchair and she's got a little PPK or whatever little handgun she's got, someone's breaking through the front door or the window, she's got a relatively equal chance of taking them out before they manage to get to her, versus not having any arms at all. I'm Sikh. I probably should have said that at the beginning. That's my sort of ideology background. And so for us, the right to bear arms is considered a divine right. The ability to protect yourself, the vulnerable other people, is absolutely critical if you're going to live a healthy and progressive expression of life. You know, one day maybe, I don't know, through some divine intervention, that might not be needed. But as long as we live in this duality, then there'll always be opposing forces for whatever reason. So the right to bear arms protects our body. And at a national level, that's the right to organize militia and deal with a tyrannical government. I think, as Judge Napolitano in America said, the right to bear arms does not protect your right to shoot at deer. It protects your right to shoot at the government when it becomes tyrannical. You know, so that's from a bodily perspective. From a property perspective, it's private trust law. You may have had a number of people talk about private trusts putting their properties into trust, and those express private trusts or common law trusts are ones which are not registered in the TRS, the Trust Registration Scheme. They're not the ones that solicitors and barristers set up for you, because they're decreed and signed up to make sure that the government gets its dues and its fangs that can tax everything that essentially passes through it. But these trusts are outside that, and I've put together a website called the Sovereign Trust online, which you can share, and from there you can create your own trust for free. It's got templates on it. A lot of people were charging a lot of money, so for those who could do it, I tried to with a number of other friends, but we bought about 6 different trust documents. We paid for a number of them, and then we amalgamated them into one sort of quite comprehensive trust solution, and that's got full instructions with it, and it goes through, and people can put their own trust together. It's got templates and videos and old books. Voice's handbook on common law, it's written in, I think, late 1800s, and a number of other books are on there. People can have a look at it. And those trusts ensure that your private assets are outside the jurisdiction of the legal, where the government can seize assets and do X, Y, and Z and fine you and stuff. And then the third one, which is the sort of jewel in the crown, I suppose, is the annulment by trial by jury, the independent judiciary, where the people are the highest arbiters of law in the lands in which they live. And those three together are ultimately what define our sovereignty. Those 3 laws are really the only 3 laws we need to protect ourselves. And as long as we're not oppressing anyone else and infringing on anyone else, in a common law state, we have the right to do whatever we choose to do, eat and drink what we choose, smoke what you choose, inject what you choose, worship how you choose, love how you choose, speak how you choose. As long as you're not directly oppressing other people and infringing on their rights to freedom and to express themselves, then, you know, freedom states you can do what you want to do. So it's from that perspective. And I think the next stage from that is if you explain to people that freedom is you can do what you want as long as you're not hurting somebody else. You don't need permission from anyone, which is how the law works. The legal is the opposite of that, because in the legal, you can't do anything unless you're given approval, a permit, a license, you know, some form of permission by a body, you know, be that a government or some form of authority, DVLA or whoever the driving body is, for example. Business, you have to register your business. So they're 2 opposite aspects, because the law deals with the living, sentient beings with conscience who are capable of navigating and expressing themselves freely, so they can do what they like without any control, as long as they don't cause loss, harm, or injury somewhere else. And then legal. Now, my view on legal is slightly different to a lot of people in the movement. I know that legal is seen as being sort of satanic, evil, controlling. But actually, it is controlling, but it's controlling for a reason, because legal is there to govern non-living entities, such as corporations, institutions, and government. And a non-living entity does require control. It does require being told what it can and can't do, because it doesn't have a conscience of its own. It's being run on a different basis. So the lawful and the legal for me are 2 aspects to a complete sort of civilization, society, whatever sort of word people want to use to describe the dynamic we're in. They're a bit like oil and water in an engine. You need both for the engine to run well. But if the 2 mix, your engine is screwed. And what for me as a sort of systems engineer, architect, and troubleshooter, the way that I see it is that that system, which was designed to govern the non-living and to put guardrails around corporations and for them to be able to have licenses and all the rest of it, and software copyrights and all the other bits and pieces that they have, IPR, which is perfectly healthy, to be honest. We wouldn't want the living to have the same rights as the non-living. I think at a common sense level, people understand that that wouldn't be good. And it's also, that's where we've got to, because people now have forgotten their identity. You know, we are first love, infinite love and consciousness as a spirit encapsulated in this finite vessel, which is the physical body. And that infinite love and consciousness is where the law sits. You know, and the body that that is encapsulated in are the three aspects that we talked about: mind, body, and property.
Yeah.
Which belong to that under the divine trust. And then the legal aspects, where people have started to recognize themselves as the legal fiction, answering to the straw man, and they're allowing themselves essentially to be processed as chattel. Yeah, so that's the way I see it. And so for me, even if you completely remove the legal system, as people start to evolve and want to do things, want to create technologies, you know, I might invent a communication system. But if I allow yourselves to use that communication system, and for some reason that communication system fails, and you are on the way to, you know, your mother couldn't get hold of you, or a loved one couldn't get hold of you, you know, if that was a completely lawful system, you might try and say that was an infringement, and I stopped you from being able to get to your mother's message, which was critical. So that way you have a limited liability around those toys, if you like, of mobile phone networks, computers, and services. So there's a limited liability in that setting, and people that choose to engage with those products and services do so by consent. And that's why legislation is by consent. But the natural law and the common law aspects, they are not by consent. They are, you know, we are essentially, at least through decency and conscience, a part of that club by the fact that our blood flows and our flesh lives. So that from sort of top level is how I sort of start the conversation at a relatively bricks and mortar level with people, to start to try and get them to understand how their lives are constructed, how we manifest, how we express ourselves, and how that kind of drops down from the creator down to our children and offspring and businesses and property and the rest of it.
Yeah. So on a physical level, from what you've said, I have an interpretation from having followed a natural life system, is a building of an immunity system. So that's our protection. So our immune system is our way of physically protecting ourselves. And then the aspects of emotionally protecting ourselves is to build some emotional resilience, to be able to step back and allow what's happening to happen. And of course, the legal aspects, I think you've done a great job at explaining that, you know, these non-physical entities like corporations, they need rules because they don't know what it is to cause loss, harm, or injury. They just blunder on through and, well, cause loss, harm, or injury intentionally or otherwise. So psychologically then, what barriers have you seen, the greatest barriers you've seen in the conversations you've been having?
I think the first one is that people don't recognize who they truly are. I think that people don't recognize, and by that I mean that obviously they recognize their facial pattern in a mirror, but they wouldn't recognize the fact that you are the infinite energy inside, first and foremost. You know, that spirit that you have, the life force that you have, is really where it starts. And I think that's, when you have a connection with that, that's where the seed of sovereignty is, the spirit of sovereignty is. And I think people are still very much, they identify with the things that have been given to them. Right? Your name was given to you, your job was given to you, your accreditations were given to you. All these things are labels which are attached to us, which we use to identify ourselves and navigate ourselves through this world. But when you think that the letters before or after your name are your self-worth, or the 3 litre, 4 litre car that you drive, or the golf club membership that you've got, or the fancy house that you've got, if you start identifying those things as your self-worth, then anything that tries to attack that self-worth is rocking the foundations of your belief system. If you don't understand that first and foremost your self-worth is the the magical individual that you are, the spiritual being that you are, the love and consciousness that you bring, the compassion that you bring, the discernment that you're capable of, the connection that we have with each other, and those commonalities, then I think it's very difficult. And I think that's where the sort of the hypnosis, if you like, or the psychological mental cocaine and addiction comes into it, because people don't want to let go of that. I think you occasionally see it with people who lose everything and then build it up again. They often are the ones who have a sense of, I'm more than just my material worth. Those people who've been driven to the edge and nearly seen death and come back again are often there, but that's because they've had to lose everything to learn the lesson that they are greater than what they had, and then they can build things back up. But those that literally went into university, got fancy cars, fancy jobs, big houses, and the system's essentially rewarded them through that behavior. As human beings, just like training a dog, if you teach it a certain behavior and it gets a biscuit or a decent piece of meat each time, it's going to repeat it, rinse, repeat. And I think that they've done a very good job in conditioning society on that basis. I mean, just to quickly go back, just to give people an idea, when we talk about the birth certificate, that sort of legal fiction, for me, that birth certificate is supposed to be a passport into the corporate world. That's how we connect with the corporate world. Like we have a physical passport to get into the airport and then onto an airplane. You need to have that straw man, which is a non-living entity, so that there is an entity for us to contract between something that represents us in that realm with a corporation. In the same way that we need a computer and a Facebook profile in order to be able to get onto Facebook Messenger, Facebook Marketplace, and the social media app. It's the craziness, if you use that as a metaphor, is that if Mark Zuckerberg decided to delete your Facebook profile, you've essentially got someone knocking on the door ready to put a bullet in your head because you no longer exist, because your Facebook profile's gone. And people are using the birth certificate and the straw man as a literal version of themselves, rather than as a medium passport into a particular 2D world in that situation. Right? It's a paper-based world, the corporate world. The transactions, the bookkeeping, all of it is a 2D world. It's two-dimensional. And so, we can see the different manifestation in technology doesn't change the logic behind it. It's still just a persona of how we interact with a different virtual realm, if you like.
So it all comes down to different sorts of interfaces.
Yes, that's different
for
sorts
instance,
of interfaces.
The interface of a body is its how strong or weak its immunity system is. And what you're talking about is the birth certificate is an interface between this spiritual being and the corporate world. So do you see many interfaces that problems with their, shall we say, the energy flow between them?
Yes, certainly. I mean, one of the projects that I did quite early on in my career was for the government, was the General Registrar's Office. Okay, so that's where all births, deaths, and marriages are registered. And the reason that those events are captured is because they're 3 of the most significant natural events that occur in terms of our manifestation into this realm, conjoining with a loved one, another soul. Sort of, you got 2 bodies, 1 soul entity in some respects, if you like, when you come together with another loved one, and you start sort of a journey of your own. And then obviously at the end, in the departure lounge, if you like, or matches, hatches, and dispatches, as one of the project managers sort of dubbed it. So those aspects are a key part where you can see a physical energy harvesting through that two-dimensional world. A lot of the guys will talk about registering cars and registering houses and giving these things away, and we talk loosely about registering children with a birth certificate. But if you have a look at the way that they do that with the particularly those 3 certificates which pertain to major life events, they really try to grapple that and create, turn it to a transaction rather than an energetic, divine energetic flow. So that's probably one of the most significant ones that we see in our day-to-day lives. And then obviously we see a lot of different interfaces, the fruits of our labor. We see the interface of that being hijacked, whether that's through oppressive fines and stuff, but even in the hijacking of our psychologies and our tribal nature through sports. Obviously this is an England-Australia call this morning. So we got like the Ashes, for example. We have rugby. At the local level in England, football is obviously an ancient tribal sport here, and that really takes that masculine energy and harnesses it, and all the money and everything that people traditionally earn during the week, they go and spend it in the stadiums at the end of the week, sort of forgetting their woes and the stress of the working week. So there's lots of places, subtle and not so subtle, pretty in your face, that these interfaces are operating. And I think that starting to understand those and having our eyes open to that kind of thing doesn't mean that we don't engage with them, but it means we engage them in such a way where we can have a level of you could call it energetic or psychic protection, so that we're engaging with stuff while retaining our energy.
Yeah. So not buying into the huge tribal wave. We see the waves going around the stadium. That was a big phenomenon, wasn't there, some time back when everyone was up and down.
The Mexican wave, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, the Mexican wave, yeah. So that was quite interesting. But that's that's everybody responding in the same way, like the birds do when the birds fly in a flock. There's someone at the front, and there's the ones at the side, and the ones in the middle are just there for the ride, really. But there they are in formation. Okay, cool interface. Tell me, you've talked about beforehand shifting power from a tyrannical institute back to sovereign people and enabling them to govern their own mind, body, property, and communities and nations. So what would you say is the crux of all of that? What is the crucial thing that people need to really get to grips with?
I mean, the seed of it is education and knowledge at a starting point. It's so, and I suppose that comes into first ourselves as the conscious adults that are there, the responsible ones, and then passing that knowledge and education. Sorry?
Yeah, I'm just saying the responsible ones.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah, the responsible ones.
A little amused.
And then passing that on to the children. So starting to remove people from the indoctrination pools or schools, if you like. We've got to really start to have a look at the way we're educating our children. Up until the 1600s, everyone was educated the same way that Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates were educated, and it was known as the 7 classical liberal arts, or the trivium quadrivium. And if we have a look at when we talk about interfaces, this is probably the blueprint interface between us and the material world. Is that the material world is essentially made of number in 4 formats. It's pure number, sacred arithmetic; number mapped in time, which is harmonics, audio, vibration, frequency; number mapped in space, which is sacred geometry; and then number mapped in time and space, which at a micro level is us doing yoga or tai chi or dancing or whatever, and at a macro level we could say are the celestial objects and planets as they sort of do their dance through the galaxy. And that's also where the space-time continuum comes from. It's essentially number mapped in those dynamics. As we as sentient beings traverse through this physical realm, we've got 5 senses, and those 5 senses pick up the contrast between the numbers, the duality. So dark and light, our eyes sense the difference between dark and light and the different vibrations of color. Our ears sense the difference between quiet and loud, treble and bass. Our taste between sweet and sour, our touch between rough and smooth, for example, hot and cold. All of these are the duality that we sit in. Everything is within that duality. Even from a knowledge and ignorance perspective, the dark and the light are there. And even at a spiritual level, the opposite of the opposite of Satan isn't God. The opposite of the Prince of Darkness is the Prince of Light, is Lucifer. A lot of people in the truth movement, they get so traumatized by Satan is that they go running and sit in Lucifer's lap. They don't realize, that there's a balance actually between the Lord, or the truth sits between the vices and the virtues, if you like.
Yes.
And so as we go through that world of duality and we start to sort of explore it, we want to communicate that with each other. So the 4 modes of number are, which we talked about, are known as the quadrivium, and they define matter, material, as we experience it. The 3 tiers of language, which are grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which are the other 3 subjects, they pertain to the mind. So grammar is the input, logic is the organization of that into understandable patterns, and then rhetoric is how we interpret that. So if we take the alphabet, the English alphabet as a basic example, A, B, C, D, E is the input at a font typeface level. Logic is organizing that into words, so cat and dog, or sentences, it's raining cats and dogs. And then at a rhetorical level, that's an understanding. If I said on this call it's raining cats and dogs, before you went outside, you'd probably grab your brolly and umbrella, and then you'd go outside, because there's an understanding that it's it's raining very heavily. If I went to Punjab or India or somewhere and I said it's raining cats and dogs, they'd probably put me in a straight jacket and lock me up. Thinking, this guy thinks cats and dogs are falling from the sky, and this guy's a nutter. We need to lock him up. And that interface, that relationship between grammar, logic, and rhetoric is how fake news has been able to operate, because our children are not taught the 7 classical liberal arts, which teach you how to teach yourself, how to learn for yourself, how to think for yourself. They're only taught arbitrary facts to memorize and then regurgitate in an exam. Right. And that's a very dangerous form of indoctrination, because if the facts that you're taught become obsolete, I think climate change science is a key one. All of those people that did degrees in climate change science, who were taught to memorize all of the climate change stuff and to regurgitate it, but were never thought to think for themselves. When climate change is shown to not be a man-made phenomenon, but is something that is a natural phenomenon, their ability to reinvent themselves, use discernment, and rethink for themselves is going to be highly thwarted. Their value on the market and in themselves for their own lives is going to become thwarted, because they're now caught in a cage of their own static memory, rather than being freed in their ability to be able to think for themselves. So the education system, known as a trivium education system, is the system that I used when I pulled my son out of school. He was 11 years old. He first went to a normal school. I then put him in a private school. But then I realized that this just wasn't the way. And then I researched. My mum was a retired deputy head teacher in England. So I had some background in terms of education processes and stuff. And then, I mean, he's 21 now. So, he's quite an interesting character. And the biggest thing is you start to critically analyze stuff. You should take the vaccine because the government told you to do so, or the NHS told you to do so, or the doctors or the media told you to do so, isn't a logical argument for taking a vaccine or any medical intervention. It's appeal to authority. They're appealing to the notion of authority, that you should believe that authority rather than think for yourself, to bypass the logical, critical thinking. Granny and granddad will die if you don't take the vaccine, is appeal to emotion. There isn't a logical argument for taking it, so they're appealing to an emotional argument to try and convince you. You'll lose your job. Appeal to fear. Again, these are all Aristotelian logical fallacies, and in the links that I've put on, there's a link to a PDF called the 42 Aristotelian Logical Fallacies. It's a free PDF online. I recommend everybody reads it. No used car salesman will ever get the better of you if you've harmed yourself with the 42 logical fallacies. And in fact, no politician or propaganda will ever get the better of you. There's a famous story that when Julius Caesar came over to what was France at the time on a war, his centurion was caught teaching the trivium to one of the minions, essentially one of the slaves. And Caesar had him stripped bare and beaten. And he was told that if I ever catch you teaching this to them again, I'll essentially throw you to the opponents, to the opposition, because if they get an understanding of this, we lose our control mechanism. And so over time, in the 1600s, it happened again between Germany and France. At the time, they were trying to, Prussia was the area, it wasn't known as Germany and France at the time. They tried to foment a war, but those in the north had been educated in the 7 classical liberal arts. So they recognized the propaganda as being false argument, logical fallacy. So they refused to engage in the war, and from that period onwards, we've really seen a direct attack on the education system. So the seed of education is the first part for me, and making sure that the future generations have a sense of freedom, that they're allowed to express that freedom and they fall in love with it, and that they're armed with the psychological and physical weaponry with which to combat that tyranny.
You pointed me into the direction of the 42 fallacies quite some time ago, and it is a very good read, I must say. A little bit more of the work that you're doing currently. You've let us know about the rapid response and challenging unlawful debt enforcements, evictions and rights. You also are involved with the Sovereign Trust and the Shield. So of all of those, could you tell the viewers a little bit about all of those and the work that you're actually doing?
You'll have to repeat yourself because you popped out.
Yeah, sorry.
Are you back?
Yeah, sorry, there's a bit of a network glitch there, I think. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So I was asking you about the work that you're currently involved with, one of them being the rapid response. Is that still something that's highly active or something that is fading away? Because I do recall seeing some videos of you having to go into hotels and retrieve luggage from people who were too scared to go into the hotel and retrieve the luggage for themselves. Quite some time back. It was probably during COVID lockdown things.
Yeah, definitely. So there was a number of different organisations. The video you're referring to is when the retired Army Captain Mick Stott had set up Guardians 300, which was the sort of the first organisation. And the thing is, when we're dealing with tyranny, the success is maintaining momentum rather than maintaining a brand. And so a lot of the groups that get set up, they will always, once they start to become particularly successful and poignant, they'll start to get infiltrated. You'll start to get opposition coming in. Egos will start to flare up. People are not conscious, not sort of in it for the right reasons, or the power and the fame and the viral videos start to get to their heads. They can start to bring it down. You get a level of implosion. You've seen a lot of that happen as well. Yeah. But Guardians 300 was there, and that really was set up to introduce people to their rights, to teach people to deal with police at rallies, to deal with the police if they tried to come to your house to shut down birthday parties or family gatherings, to deal with bailiffs and debt collectors coming to try and seize property, and allow people essentially to start to exercise their common law rights against the tyranny. Introduce people to a new way of thinking, and to really start to get the education out there and the knowledge on the streets of the basics of protecting yourselves really and living freely, and what the sovereign being was about. And yes, you're absolutely right, getting people out of hotel quarantines was another one of those role plays that we took people through. And that particular instance, elderly couple had come back from Dubai to to attend their son's funeral, actually, and they wouldn't let them out of the hotel.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And then Mick and the team managed to get them out of the hotel, but they left their baggage in, so they were then too frightened to go back and get it in case they got imprisoned in the hotel again. So we went back to get the baggage for them. That over time, the Guardians 300 teams, we trained a lot of people. In about 18 months, we were working about 6 days a week at a time. I managed to get around 12,000 people. That included people attending the whole day sessions. Kerry Ike, rest in peace, David Icke's eldest daughter, who passed away a couple of years ago. David Icke himself attended the following day, attended the 8-hour session to have a look at the training that was in place. And in there, we also sort of briefed people on taking body cams to rallies, to counter police tyranny, to capture any infringements on the rights and stuff. So then David bought a body cam off the back of that, which I set up for him. So we've had a range of people. John Bingley, who's an advisor to the House of Lords, attended one that was down on the south coast to see what it was about. That was quite an honour, because I'd followed John's work from before around the Constitution and bits and pieces like that. And then later on, the team sort of started to band out into local groups, which was rapid response, pulling together communities, using the disparate training that we'd done across the UK, and start to build communities around that knowledge, where people then start to serve themselves and support their communities. And that's still going today. There's a lot of Telegram groups, pretty much one for each county in England. There's a few in Ireland, Scotland, and they tried to set one up in Canada. And there's different copycat groups that if you like, or similar groups that take inspiration from that, and then they set up. And that's a positive thing. You know, it's not about being precious. It's just about inspiring people to be sovereign. And the more different groups there are to set up, the more difficult it becomes to infiltrate it. So for me, it's not about people. A lot of people traditionally will try and say, well, what happened to that group? Most of the time, that group disperses and shares the knowledge and becomes a proper distributed network. And that's really what we need. Lots of individual communities, lots of individual groups, all sharing that common knowledge and starting to stand on their own feet and stand on their rights. So rapid response is there now. It's moved on to dealing with evictions, going even more into courtrooms. Guardians did a little bit of courtrooms. It's rapid response. People like Phil McLaughlin are also now working with the Royal Marshal Authority. Little Mikey Fotio, who's people have seen, a veteran on who's often was in his army gear and his uniform on the rapid response ones. Toby, a guy known as Article 61, Mick from Coventry area. Lots of lads out there who sort of travelled up and down the breadth and height of the country to help people out. That's still an active group. When calls come out, if people are in trouble, we post it out there and try and get local community down. There's a website which tells you how to deal with the constables, how to check for valid warrants. And interesting, in all the 1,000 different visits we've had, we've never seen one legitimate liability order to seize people's property. There's never been one piece of paperwork which has a judge's signature on it who's willing to take liability for the infringements, because they know that what they're doing is fraud. So it's all by that virtual consent that doesn't even exist on paper. You know, the automated, I'm sure you've been through it before, but all those automated warrants and stuff are completely illegitimate. They're illegal, and they infringe on your constitutional rights. And then more recently, I've supported Chris Hargreaves, a member of the Shield, where the cap's from. They're sort of making the streets safer, putting boots down on the streets, helping the children and particularly the ladies and the girls going from A to B, where the police aren't willing to, or seem to be over-resourced chasing people for Facebook infringements, aren't capable of securing the safety of the vulnerable and the girls on the streets from various aspects like migrant hotels and other bits and pieces where we've seen particular hotspots of activity. And so that started to have a look at really taking on the narrative and the discussion and debate around grooming gangs and paedophilia and the darker arts that are used to control nations and geopolitical bodies like the UN and WHO and everybody else.
Wow. The name of this program is dreaming the new dream. So could you give me a dream, a vision that you see where we're going to? Because much of what you've talked about the tyrannical side of government, the lack of knowledge for people in their beingness. How would you dream the dream? What do you aspire to for humanity?
I aspire to a humanity which looks to try and leave with each generation a better state of affairs for the next generation. A humanity which has been able to express itself and have this wonderful experience, because it is a wonderful experience. And part of the tyranny is the other side of the coin to the freedom. That is part of the duality. If we can look at it as tyranny, it's ultimately control and freedom. And those who are control freaks and psychopathic narcissist types, that's where it turns into tyranny. But there's a balance between control and freedom, and it'd be great to be able to see a humanity where you can express yourselves the way you want. You have bodily autonomy, autonomy over your mind, autonomy over your property. There isn't any taxation. People are operating from a conscience, looking after their parents, looking after their loved ones, looking after the vulnerable in society, because we have an abundance of resources with which to do so, not because we're taxed to the hilt, told that that's going to happen, and then the services are substandard. Rather than it being contractual, it becomes a covenant of conscience. It's done by love and compassion rather than through some sort of forced rule set. And really, for people to be able to live under the common law that the wizards of old put together, that aspect of being able to express yourselves, talk freely, love freely would be fantastic. But I think there'll always be a contention between control and freedom. We've just got to a point where the control has got extreme, and those who like to control other people and tell other people what to do have been allowed to get their tentacles into the system way further than they should ever have been allowed to. And as a result of that, the balance has been lost. We don't see healthy debate on the television. We don't see healthy debate in journalism. We don't see a healthy balance of articles coming out through media. We don't see healthy debate in Parliament. It's all about an agenda that's being paid for, and that control mechanism being forced on everyone, everything being weaponized as part of that tool set, whether it's immigration, whether it's sexuality, LGBTQ, whether it's race through BLM, Islamophobia, whether it's whatever it is, everything's been weaponized. The monetary system, even our relationships through things like marriage, toxic masculinity type narrative, everything's been weaponized, where you're kind of taught to either hate yourself and be a victim, and pushing you into that kind of mindset rather than an empowered sovereign mindset. So through fantastic shows and discussions like this, through the initiatives which take things to the street, like Rapid Response and the Shield, and what was Guardians 300, and obviously people being able to learn about trust law and setting up trusts so that they're not taxed and they can retain their property and their houses and stuff. Just seeing people start to engage with that true education, and starting to see people homeschool their children or build schools of genuine education around the trivium, quadrivium, and the way that the universe is manifest. Genuine health is quite close to your heart, Priti, I know. Build immunity, psychological, physical, biological immunity, self-defense of the body, self-defense biologically, self-defense of the mind. And to see strong individuals build a strong society, that for me is the sort of dream, and I think that's where we're going. I think we're heading there at an increasingly exponential rate, to be honest with you now, and I think shows like this evidence that, and the conversations that are being had with everyday people on the street and in the pubs and stuff is starting to evidence and surface that as well.
So the message is getting out there little by little.
I believe so.
And in the trivium quadrivium, do you know any places that are actually practicing this? Is it actually landed anywhere, either in the UK or anywhere around the world that you know of?
Well, Steiner schools touch on the trivium education system,
Yeah.
but ultimately it's for people. It's not. We shouldn't be looking outwardly. It's I see it more in the people's houses. You know, our individual houses first and foremost are
Okay.
where the whole thing starts. And I think that so I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing a lot more home schooling, home education from that perspective. I'm seeing there's a website called Trivium Education. There's a website called Trivium Pursuit. So these are places that people can start to help themselves and do the things that they need to do. So yeah, definitely, I'm seeing that information being disseminated out, and even the tyranny is helping us. To be honest, it's one part of the duality. If they hadn't been here, and this is why I believe it's the greatest time to be alive in the last 6,000 years, is because what some people call the Kal Yuga in the sort of Vedic scriptures, or the Dark Ages in other forms, is that because that contrast that we talk about is so extreme right now, the experience is at its best in a way, because where you get the darkest dark, you get the brightest light. And so in a way, if people can sort of understand that the pain is always going to be part of this experience, you know, that's been put here as well, so that we can experience that, and there's something to offset it against. Without sadness, there's no expression of joy, there's no experience of joy. Without darkness, you can't see the light. So these are not you know, they're there to be had in balance and understood, but at the moment the contrast gives us that extreme sense of being here. And those people who have sort of opposed that tyranny and set up, you know, the radio show like you have, the movements and the health movements like you have, Priti, in the UK, then these are the great lights of the moment, that against all of those trillions of that have been spent in propaganda, against all of the indoctrination, against all of the conditioning, it hasn't worked on the three of us, for example, just to use an immediate example. Yeah, we're still here, we're still shining, we've still managed to hold our conscience, we still managed to connect with the Creator, connect with infinite love and energy, and look to still try and share that with our brothers and sisters at large. And they haven't ever managed to get total control, because that isn't really what this experience is about. So I definitely can see it increasingly every day. And so, yeah, I think it's a really great time to be alive, and people should enjoy it. I don't think they should feel too anxious. You know, we're on an upward trajectory, and the key thing is go out there and talk to people and be positive about it. Yeah.
True. Hey, I wanted to step in there, a conversation. You know, did you have the Yellow Pages in the UK?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Used to.
That's my point. So the Yellow Pages in Australia, I mean, they were the Holy Bible. I mean, you used to spend bloody tens and tens of thousands just to have a full page. And then when the internet came along, and you can then set up a storefront, I mean, people started to use their money and took it away from Yellow Pages, and then got onto the internet and had a website, and then they got to a blog, and then, of course, the social media come along. And once the social media came in, you saw the advertising dollars that went into the local newspapers disappear, because the prime money that was going into local newspapers was real estate and cars. And now people could actually get that online instantaneously, and they could see various photos of that car inside and out, make an offer. So we saw that local journalism close up as well. So Yellow Pages went, the local throwaway newspapers went, and as a consequence, the newspapers that had the journos didn't have the money. And so the journalists who were taught to actually investigate a story and reveal both sides of the story evaporated, because the money wasn't coming into those mainstream media. And then what I saw was the likes of Mr. Murdoch going to the States and to set up Fox News as an online streaming service, cable. And I saw him use the simple demographics of his print media. So in his print media, the magazines would go out through in Australia through a company called Gordon & Gotch, which did all the distribution. But, you know, you could have a fishing magazine, but you might have 10 different versions of that fishing magazine, different cover, but the story would be inlaid, designed for either a 12-year-old readership level, or a 20-year-old, or up to 30-year-old. And so he learned about demographics. So when he went into the States, he chose to look at the advertising dollar and realized he couldn't actually go for the whole, say, $1. So we just use the principle of a dollar. He knew that the likes of CBS, NBC, ABC, and Comcast, they generally spoke of the four major operators there who really drove the actual income going into that dollar. So he chose to sacrifice 50 cents on the dollar, but not being a good bloke to all and sundry. So he chose to go, as the Indians would say, I got the right wing, the other guy's got the left wing, but it's the same bird. He went for the 50 cents. He went to the right, went for the conservatives. Those are the ones who've got the money to buy businesses and invest and all that stuff. And he became the soapbox for all those people who are in the conservative movement. And he drove that money and eyeballs to a station where he ended up like getting 5%, 10%, 20%, 30, 40 cents out of the 50 cents. So basically he got 40 cents on the dollar. Those other four operators, really, they suffered quite financially on their earnings. And so they had to look at how they were going to play the game. There's no need for them to go into the right and the conservative because Murdoch already stitched that up. So they had to go to the left wing and start promoting the legacy media and the DEI and all the other versions so they could get their income stream. But Murdoch did something really cunning, well, business orientated. He used the money that he got and he went and bought sport, NFL. He bought netball, basketball, ice hockey, baseball. And the reason he got them was he got the eyeballs of all the Democrat voters who like to participate in the sport. So all of a sudden, the Democrats realized, oh my God, we're losing our audience base. We need to bloody take this guy on and we need to either pay him money to get some airtime or we're going to have to really come up with a game plan that's going to build the numbers for us to get eyeballs. So the strategy there, if you look at mainstream media, is either you can go for the conservative market or you go for the Democratic liberal market, and you've got to go all out to try and get that income to come through because they don't have the income and they don't have the journalist integrity anymore. It's just social media is where you get your news. And now with the advent of AI, with the stories that come out, you can't even conceptualize whether that's the truth or not. It's a huge, big mind set that people need to be very aware of, and you can be overloaded with it. And so hence the reason you really got to step back to blanket yourself away from mainstream media and social media just to get back into that point that I interrupted you was get back to talking to people in the pubs, get to talk to people on the bus, get to talk to people away from social media and interact with them just like we were as humans. Like we've got to get out of the cities and get out into nature and have a swim and get into the salt water and get that negative ions, go into the bush, get the negative ions, just to get back into balance. Hey, mate, I'm on my soapbox. Sorry, we're here to listen to you.
You go for it.
No, not at all. It's absolutely spot on. You're right, and that's how, and that's the key example of how they've created that virtual cage. By creating these demographics and the sort of tribes within tribes for people to relate to each other. But at a global level, they're just trying to guide everyone in the same direction. They're just cajoling everyone in the same direction. And that's why we've seen that convergence. Because you're absolutely right. Once you've got one guy that's essentially got everyone's ears, where does the polarity come from in the discussion? I mean, I don't know whether you guys, from what your nature programs are like, but when we were little, you obviously had Richard Attenborough, who everyone knows about, and David Attenborough. And then Bellamy. You had David Bellamy.
Yeah, but he actually
David Bellamy.
He exposed.
He used to come through the bushes.
Absolutely.
Bullshit, and then he got shafted for exposing it.
Absolutely, and so there's this, to the point that you were saying, there's an example where even there you had like a really healthy debate that could have been had. The powers that owned and controlled that media organization that actively went out to discredit him and wipe out his career. So it's just that's the level of. And I worked at the BBC. I built the BBC. I was there part of the team that built BBC iPlayer when it first came out around 2005, 2006. I joined them. So I saw it from the inside, the way that corruption at the BBC works. Because funnily enough, when we talk about journalism, the project that everyone wanted to fund was something called BBC 2.0. And the idea was that they were going to redevelop the BBC website so that citizen journalists, those who actually pay the license fee, would be able to put up their own editorial, their own pictures and photographs, and their own commentary, their own videos. So if you had, like, you know, that back in those days, John Simpson and Kate Adie had put a story up just as the smartphone and the red button had come online. We thought, you know, there couldn't be anything greater that you'd be able to go and add to the stories. And also what it would do was you would be able to pick out the best talent from the people, you know, the best writers, the best videographers, the best photographers. It was almost like, why wouldn't you do this? And obviously in hindsight, you realize the reason they wouldn't do that is because they'd lose control of the narrative. They'd lose control of what's actually being shown on the website. And almost everyone at ground level, all the engineers and everyone, that's the project that they wanted to do. But they ended up putting billions behind BBC iPlayer. And for us, it was just absolute insanity, because people had video recorders. They had personal TiVos and stuff like that, where they could record 2 or 3 channels. They could watch it back. And all iPlayer did was take that technology and stick it in the cloud, which was a complete waste of money, to be honest with you. It would have been obviously it would have been a benefit to the people, and that's why they didn't do it. So, you know, when you talk about the journalism there and how Murdoch operated from a global level, you can also see within the media organizations how the funding they used also backed that same globalist monolith voice that has sort of almost drowned everything out over the last 5-6 years, certainly before the internet really started to take hold and a little bit of a level playing field to come out of it. But definitely journalism's key.
It's been good. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, so yeah, social media. I mean, we saw that young fella in Minnesota there who went in there and with a camera, him and his mate, and they went and to that building there, and there's supposed to be all those bloody childcare centres in that building, and he revealed it, and boom, then it all come in. But in the old days, there would have been journalists from the Chicago Tribune or Minneapolis St. Paul who would have had investigative journalists who would have exposed that.
Absolutely, and I think that's a key aspect to it from a collective perspective. We've got to get the truth back out there and real debate. And that's why I say the education and the logical fallacies and stuff are a key starting point that anyone can get a hold of and start to read them and share those with your children, and start to educate them and start to pick out the lies that's around us every day and the propaganda that's around us every day. It gamifies it and it makes it interesting and it's good fun. And you're sort of looking out for each other, teaching your family to look out for itself, and start to dissect the propaganda and the nonsense that's out there, including what's coming out of AI. I mean, AI can still, regardless of how complex it gets, it still has to communicate to us in a language, and that language is either truthful or it's fallacious. And if we understand what those fallacious patterns look like and what the mathematics of fallacy looks like in linguistic terms, then we can start to pick it out and identify it and counter it.
So we increase our level of discernment, our capability of choosing with a different mindset.
Absolutely. I mean, if you amongst the sort of the yogi types and the holy men and the rabbis and the imams and the priests and stuff, discernment is really the highest spiritual gift one can have, because it's ultimate awareness. Yeah, that's how they have it. They say that a swan is supposed to be the most is the symbol of discernment, because you feel if you mix water and milk in a bowl, it'll drink all the milk molecules and just leave pure water behind in the bowl. And that's the level of discernment we're expected to have sort of mentally and psychologically in this particular era that we're in, where it is so convoluted and murky. So,
well, let's talk about radio, for example. So we're on the 88 frequency, so FM 88.0. So when you get on a push bike and you go on your one turn on the wheel, that's 1 cycle or 1 hertz. So we're traveling at 88 hertz or 88 cycles per second. And so when we put our signal onto that transmitter, away it goes. But Did you know that's called a carrier wave? But did you know there's a sub-carrier wave that sits just underneath it? So I don't know, you would have had it, but in BBC you probably had that teletext. So you went onto their and you click that button, and of course up come the little screen, and it gave you the sports news or gave you other news and stuff. Well, they were using the sub-carrier wave. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So there is that suggestion that what you call it, malevolence or bloody mischievous. You know, some people could actually broadcast on that sub-carrier wave, and based on your cognitive telepathy, if you want to call it, or your brain frequency, you could pick up on that carrier wave or that sub-carrier wave, and you know, you might be impinged to do something that you weren't really inclined to do.
Yeah, it's definitely the manipulation of the frequencies and stuff. I mean, we see we often experience that through the phases of the moon. Moon controls the time and the water on Earth. You know, both of the tides in terms of the ocean's tides and the sacred feminine tides that drop an egg every month and stuff. So we can see how and where the frequency and vibration in the universe has an effect. And there's no question that the powers that be understand the frequencies and have tried to use those frequencies against us. A lot of people find they sort of think that everything that is 666 is satanic, and everything that's 13 is unlucky, and everything that's 33 is Masonic. But these numbers are sacred numbers. That's why the sacred arithmetic is quite important. You know, 33 is the number of vertebrae in our back. You know, it's a sacred architecture. You know, number 13 is the traditional number of months in a natural calendar of 28 days for each month. 13 is also, if the 12 disciples, who was the 13th? It was the master. You know, it can't be that unlucky. And then 666 is how we define life: 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 6 electrons are the code for life. So all of the frequencies, they've sort of hijacked, all the numbers they've hijacked, and they try and use them against us, so that if we see them negatively through ignorance, we alienate ourselves from the very energetic power that would otherwise help liberate us and give us power through knowledge. So you're absolutely right. They've used those numbers, and it is a malevolent way of mirroring everything, really, to try and use it and weaponize it. So absolutely, you can see that. And the 3 kingdoms in the Bible, of the sort of, when we talk about heaven, hell, and earth as well, are transposed into the frequencies that we operate at, in terms of 432 hertz at a celestial level, 528 hertz at a terrestrial level, and 633 hertz at the telestial level, subterranean. It's all encoded within there, in the ancient scriptures as well. We've just forgotten how to interpret them. I mean, sort of going back on that, Bible stories and stuff, it's another way they've alienated people, is to literalize the interpretation of the ancient texts. You know, a lot of children nowadays, when I speak to them, obviously we're in England, it's predominantly Christian country, and I ask them, you know, what do they think of the Creator or God and stuff like that, and they said, oh, you know, but people can't walk on water. You know, and there's an aspect of that where there's a literal sense of someone walking on the water, which they can't relate to. But when we understand that Christ was up against the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire was using Roman maritime law to enslave its population and the people in the jurisdictions it was capturing, and it used that maritime law in the courts, which is the law of the sea. And when they tried to drown Christ in the law of the sea, he walked on their jurisdiction of water, because he understood who his Father is, and the waves parted for him, so his feet remained on the seabed, terra firma. There's a lot of esoteric coding and a lot of metaphor and allegory that's in those, and that's why the Bible's written in parable. You know, so it's just sort of putting a different lens on stuff so that people can start to engage and connect with the knowledge in a higher consciousness way and understand the nuance in it. So the frequencies and the numbers are absolutely key to it.
True.
Yeah, and what you've been saying about the malevolent nature, this is not new. None of it is new. I remember back in the 70s, even when you went to the cinema, okay, there weren't journalists there, but there was the odd frame of the either the ice cream interjected into the film. So even if it was just one frame, there would be a flash of it to try to influence the audience so that they would go out and buy the ice creams and the orange juices that were on sale as a support for the film. So that's been well known of and well, shall we say, advertised. So the underlying frequencies that Jeff talks about and all the things that you're talking about, and none of this is new. It's all about, it's just we need a better understanding so that we can be better in the new vision that we are experiencing now, and can create for the next generation, for ourselves as well. What would you say to that?
Yeah, definitely. That subliminal messaging has been there. Like you said, it's time. It's as old as creation itself. The creation, like I said, they are the numbers. And so, this battle between knowledge and ignorance, if you like, between freedom and enslavement has been a timeless one. And the architecture that we all operate in is always been that way. If there was a war started 2,000 years ago, the props and the costumes might have been different, but the underlying forces of greed, jealousy, envy, lust, whatever it is that's driving those conflicts, they're the same primal aspects. But it's up to us to have a higher consciousness. It's up to us to educate and galvanize ourselves. As people selling ice cream and popcorn and using subliminal messaging and neuro-linguistic programming for those reasons, you can argue that's their dharma, that's their path, that's their calling, is to be corporate people and to sell those things. Our calling as spiritual individuals is to galvanize our children and ourselves against those dark arts, so that we understand them, so that we become immune to those types of attacks. Because there will always be people that try to use the technologies. I think that's part of nature. It creates those opposing forces. So for me, the solution is education, to create the knowledge and counter weaponry, if you like, to those things, rather than trying to eradicate those things completely, because they're a part of the game, and we've got to raise our game. If they've put someone in place, then we've got to raise our game and counter that. So that's how I sort of see those elements. You're absolutely right. It's not new. It's been around since time immemorial, and I don't think it'll ever go away.
No, we live in a world of duality.
Yeah, and that's the experience. That's the joy of it. That's the beauty of it for me. And the pain and all of it's temporary. This vessel is it's a finite vessel. This is a finite life that we have. And part of the beauty, and there's a lot of people think that we'll get to a point where life becomes infinite with the medical stuff. It would be carnage, and there would be great misery if all of a sudden we could live forever. There's a certain sweetness to the fact that things do come to an end. It gives a real poignant focus on the fact that you have an appreciation for what you've got. And that's lost if everything's just there all the time. You see it with people. You see children that are born into rich families. There's no appreciation for the wealth they've got. They tend to squander it because there's been no contrast to teach them an appreciation of that wealth. People that are spoilt with love, that haven't seen pain, and they don't know how to transmute it. They don't know how to deal with the pain because they've been brought up in a mollycoddled environment. So the duality is there. It's something that's key to our experience in this dimension. And I think for those that really long for absolute constant joy and state of contentment, then you sort of do your karma and you live an honest, righteous life, and you merge back with the Creator and the oneness. And you put a request not to be assigned back to the duality again, I suppose, because the ultimate perfection is sat in that infinite love and consciousness in complete harmony. But this dimension for me is about this experience. And I don't think, I can say something quite controversial in the sense that even if it never gets solved at a complete global collective level, our individual journeys are not affected by that. Our individual journeys to do the right thing, to be connected, to make the right decisions, to operate with love and compassion and consciousness is not in any way in the hands of anybody else. It's in our hands. That's our journey. And whether everyone else makes it or not doesn't change our ability to be able to express ourselves. So whether everyone gets there or not, I don't think changes what we should do or how we behave. I think we still have a role to play in our own lives, in our own destiny. And then if we can get everyone there on a critical mass, then that is obviously the dream to be dreamt, but a personal dream for everyone, and something that I think we should all take great courage and strength in, is that our individual sovereignty isn't affected by how anyone else operates. It's affected by our own expression of how we navigate the mind, body, and our property through this existence.
I'm going to let that sink in for a little bit, because it's beautifully spoken. Okay.
Yeah.
So what are you working on these days, Sukh? What can we what's 2026 looking like for you?
So 2026 now, I think it's about starting to have a look. A lot of the sort of on the ground solutions are starting to become a lot more developed. Jeff's already alluded to a number of people in Australia and America who are starting to be able to operate with greater freedoms. We do have a greater level of constraint on this island. There's a reason they chose this island to hatch the empire from, certainly the financial center of it. So we have a slightly bigger task here. I always say that England was hijacked in 1066. Everyone else was only hijacked in the last couple of 100 years. A lot of, like, Australia is still quite a young country. The Sikh religion is only sort of 300 years since the last master of Sikhism was sort of ascended 1708. But the English since 1066 have been been oppressed in the way that they're able to express themselves. So it's really starting to get that in place. The solutions, pushing them out to people. The Willoughby Genius app that Charles Fernandez has put together, the Shield organisation that Chris Hargreaves has put together, the rapid response efforts of communities starting to pull themselves together. It's really starting to get these efforts to have some coordination between them, so that there's some synergies that start to build. So mind, body, and property are protected. Get people really starting to get more confidence in the trusts, so they can start to formulate their own trusts. Why trusts? Because trusts are the divine architecture that we've been gifted, this material asset called Earth and the universe as we know it into. You probably had people talking about trusts on the show. I'm not sure, but there's three key roles in a trust, which is a grantor who puts assets into a trust, a trustee who manages those assets but doesn't benefit from them, and the beneficiary who benefits from the assets but can't squander them, and has them managed on their behalf. And if you have a look at the Holy Trinity, which we referred to earlier, in terms of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, that is the highest level of divine trust. The Father is the grantor, who's put this material world into the divine trust. Our soul is the trustee, because it manages our interface in the material world, but the soul itself can't benefit from the material resources. It can't drink the water, it can't eat the food, it can't wear the clothes. And then the Son, being the body, is able to benefit from those. So that's the initial architecture of the divine trust, and that's obviously detailed in all of the ancient texts. And then just getting people to connect with that architecture in a healthy way, so that those natural law principles we see start to get propagated out more. We have discussions like this. We try and tie more people together, so that the good people that are putting those solutions together, so that we can sort of land the higher consciousness in our everyday lives. It's just starting to get more into that space. I think the last 5 or 6 years has been about shaping those solutions and developing them. And I think now the next 5 or 10 years is about landing those solutions, pushing them out, and getting greater awareness in the way that we live our lives. And different people want to build different types of communities, different types of collectives, different types of initiatives. It's just starting to support them and make sure that they're accelerated as quickly as possible.
Sure.
Jeff, you know of some places, don't you? They've lived off grid, and they're building their own communities. And one of the things I've understood about communities is they all come together, and then at some point it disperses. That it's time for them to go. They come together, they do their thing, and then they're not always that sustainable. What would you say about that, Jeff?
Um,
You were telling.
right. So I've travelled quite extensively around the world with that in mind as a community. I probably would say that the Findhorn community in Scotland would probably be the closest, even though it's gone through so many incarnations in terms of its leadership conception. But I mean, when David Spangler came along and he suggested they turn their community into a teaching university, then people saw him as the next Jesus Christ. You know, he's reincarnated. He said, no, it's not about me. It's about everybody else. So that's why he packed up and went up to Washington State. But they have evolved. But then if you look at UK, for example, with, you know, England, Scotland, and Wales, it's a community that's evolved too, and it's become into counties, and it's got local councils, and so it's evolved to the point where it's most things come down to two parties, isn't it? Unless there's what do you call it, multi-voting things, MEP or whatever they call it, which is New Zealand's got
proportional representation.
Yeah, so they get spread out. So we go from the little communities that could be on acreage. There might be, you know, 50 acres. I mean, where we are south of the border, there is the Shire of Tweed Edge. They have multiple occupancy, so people buy, you know, 20 acres, 50 acres, and they can actually have a number of dwellings placed on that. There's very few counties or councils in Australia that allows for that, but that particular area is very filled with very inspired, creative people. It's a treasure to go in there because there's a lot of they've kept a lot of natural elements there. You know, the waterfalls and the trees are there, and the food's organic. It's a lovely spot to go. So that's just that. If you start looking around, you know, I mean, the Egyptians as a civilization come and gone. It's like the people who incarnated in that time, you know, brought that era into. They rose with the great library of Alexandria. You know, I mean, but generally speaking, the history of man has been really subjugated to saying we only been around for 5,000 years, but obviously we've been a lot longer than that. I mean, there's a lot of information that shows it's been upward of 250,000 years, particularly in the Gobi Desert. Underneath the Gobi Desert, there's things to be looked at in the future. You know, but does that really answer your question? I don't know if I have actually.
No, it's cool. It's a contribution to the healthy debate that Sukh has managed to bring into the show today. It's fabulous.
Yeah, so if you have your communities of like-minded people, I mean, it's quite tribal. I mean, there was a TV commercial years ago for McDonald's, and so Sukh comes along and says, you know, you got to select your football team. So, you know, it's in the schoolyard. You say, you know, you pick so-and-so because, you know, he's going to be good for a centre forward or he might be a goalie and all that stuff. No. Hey, we get Suki because we need Suki because his dad will come and pick us up and take us to McDonald's. So the Democrats, Suki, I'll put him in the goal mouth, but we really, the end result, we win because we're going to go to McDonald's again. Right. But so community, so I mean, Lord of the Flies, a perfect example of a great book that exposed Ralph. Right, let's mobilize, let's create the community, and then you get the other mob who become the warriors who don't even build a community; they just come and raid them and take over. So that's whoever's got the biggest gun, basically. It's nothing's really changed in their playground, isn't it?
Okay. But for us, dreaming a new dream would be integrating the duality so that people can see the paradoxes and can have that greater level of discernment and decide to choose from a higher perspective, from a perspective, as Sukh was saying, from compassion and from love. The non-physical things that you can't touch compassion, you can't touch love, but you know it when you feel it.
Well, have you guys? Well, you would have heard of curling photography, wouldn't you?
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've certainly heard of curling photography. Yep.
So, you know,
That,
yeah, it's a great example. I mean, if you have curling photography, or if you've got people who've got the ability to dowse, and we've done this years and years ago. So we had plants in pots, and we were in the room there, and we just got people to generally have an affection with the actual plant. And we went and tested them to see how far their energy field went. And you would step back at least, 5 feet, 10 feet. But if you told that plant that you're going to kill it, real consciousness attached to it. We also did it with humans, and we got them to just tone. And you can use the letters of the alphabet, or you use the letters M and N, and you can do B, B. But if you sing your name, like Sukh Singh, and just play around with it, you fill your body with oxygen. And as you fill your body with oxygen, your energy field raises up to the point that if you had curling photography and took a snapshot, your energy would completely change. And if it was one of those ones that had color in it, you'll see how your vibration had increased just by looking at the various colors, to the point that in World War II in the Navy, they would use the color red for their signaling, because there's a short wavelength. And so they could actually send their message across when the ships are very close, but ships that are further out wouldn't be able to see that red light. So you imagine if you were there and your energy level was red, and you walked into a room, you would then oscillate with someone who was actually operating in the frequency and the color of red. But imagine if you started to raise your thought vibration, and you started looking at the water you drank, and it was of high nutrition, had minerals in it. You started looking at the food that was grown with love. And there's something to be said for people who say a prayer when they're eating the food, because you're energetically changing the structure of the energy of the food that you're going to participate. So, and then as you start raising your consciousness by everyday life, you'll find that people that you were had kindred soul to, suddenly they're no longer in your space, because you've just somehow or another transformed yourself and transmitted the energy to a point that you feel alone. And if you feel alone, you're thinking, what's going on here? But in the meantime, your consciousness has risen to a point that all of a sudden other people come of like minds. It's that's the euphoria of walking on this path as a spiritual body disciple, if you want to call it such, of life itself, the finite life.
Yeah.
Anyway. Hey, it's not about me tonight. Sukh, mate.
So one of the programs that Jeff and I did back in November was he wanted to know where I got the name Priti from. Well, I got the name Priti from Muniraj, who was the world leader of Babaji devotees. And when I went to the ashrams in India, this was their absolute practice, that the gods ate first, and all of the foods was given to the gods, and you wouldn't eat anything unless it were blessed by the gods in the first instance. So it was an automatic part of their cultural way of eating, collectively we made the foods together. We might do mantras with the Om Namah Shivaya, other kinds of activities while we're preparing the food, in order to prepare it for the gods, for these non-physical forces that drive how all of the community comes together or doesn't come together. So I completely get what Jeff is saying about there's something to be said about praying. Grace before meals was something that I grew up with, and I'm sure other people did as well. So how we feed ourselves and what we feed ourselves is not just about the physical food. How we feed ourselves in terms of how much media we let in, how much of the TikTok, how much of all of the other, shall we say, choices that are available. I remember a story that someone said about, well, would you like a drink, please? Yes, that'd be nice. It goes, okay, would you like 7-Up, Fanta, Pepsi, Coke, Coca-Cola? So I don't want soda, I just want water. yes, but you could have, and went on and on and on with all the different variations, iron brew, all the different sodas that are out there. And you say, but I don't want soda. Can I just have some fizzy water, please? So I see this, how we feed ourselves is incredibly important. It's not just the physical food, it is the emotional food, it is the mental food. And my experience has been that when you're overloaded mentally, doesn't matter how good a quality the physical food is, it'll, when beings, all of us, are under stress, that takes a huge toll on our ability to feed ourselves in whatever dimension.
Yep.
Okay. Do you have anything to say about that? Because you know
Absolutely,
that's close to my heart.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, that comes in with when we're looking at the way that things are farmed, right? When we have a look at why society been traumatized into veganism, right? And I'm not anti-vegan. My grandmother was vegan, but it wasn't weaponized. Yeah, my grandmother didn't refuse to sit at the table with me because I was going to have a bacon sandwich. Whereas
Yes.
today,
Yes.
people become intolerant. It's like, well, I'm not sitting with you. You got violence on your plate. You know, it's this sort of weaponization of understanding there. And the reason that that's occurred is because we've lost the art of good husbandry with the animals. And just as Jeff said with the plants are sentient beings. So, you know, like this is always my discussion, is that your food and your dietary is ultimately, it's a choice, but it doesn't determine your spiritual level based on what type of food you eat. It's how that food is grown, reared, nurtured, harvested, the love that's put into it at the point at which it's sown, how it's maintained, how it's sustained, the life it's given, and then how it's dispatched. It's all an art form. It's an energetic and spiritual art form, absolutely, from a biological sense. So it's bright and it's tasty and it's colorful and it's you know, all the rest of it, but also that it's energetically sound, that it is a high vibrational food pattern from an energy perspective. So these are absolutely part and parcel of the business. There's the bowler hat farmer in England at the moment. He might be a good person to have a chat with. I know Mark Byford, and sort of that's another person that we're supporting, is around the farming piece. You know, it's really key that we start to understand that. As in the Sikh warrior code, for example, if we're being really strict, you're not allowed to eat female meat or the young. You're only allowed to eat adult male meat, and that has to be killed, has to be dispatched in a certain way. You know, it has had fulfilled a life. And then when you take its life, it has to be in a very calm place. They normally sit down with a goat, or usually it's for their favorite, or they'll go hunting with a wild boar or something. If they sit down to dispatch it, they'll sit down and they'll actually give it love until it's completely calm. And then when it's in a completely calm state, they'll just sort of flick their hands blindside, and when it looks the other way, they'll remove the head in one blow. And the idea from a scientific perspective, when an animal knows it's going to die, it's full of fear. The fear hormones are being pumped into its blood, into its organs, and you're consuming that. That's not the correct way to dispatch an animal. And when you've got animals lined up in an abattoir, they know where they're going. You know, they understand what's happening. That, you know, that's just not the right way to do it. So you're absolutely right. Food across the whole piece, whether people choose to be vegan or whether people choose to eat meat, it doesn't bother me. That's a food choice. But for me, it is just a food choice. Because no one can really draw the line between where the sentient is in a spinach, where it is in a chicken, or where it is in anything else, or in us. All of it potentially is a valid food source and energy source. But it's the intent with which we do that. It's the love in which we rear it and nurture it and harvest it and the rest of it. So absolutely spot on with that. I agree with it
100%. Yes, I remember my granny. She used to go out and pick a chicken and and pluck that chicken and cook that chicken on that day. And they looked after the animals on the farms that they were at. and of course didn't think twice about that's violence or anything. That was, and the same with the pigs and everything else. They hung the pigs, they looked after them. Yeah. Now there's so much of a production line, like you're right.
It's industrial. Everything's been weaponized, Priti. It's whether it's immigration has been weaponized, right? The immigrants, whether it's veganism, whether it's race, it doesn't matter. It's just been weaponized. There's no healthy debate on it. You know, if we have a look at immigration, there's probably like 1 to 2.5% of people in a nation who even have the orientation to be adventurous and pioneering and leave their homeland. You know, and of that proportion, even fewer will actually do so, and that's the natural movement that we've seen around the globe before the sort of military-industrial complex has started its campaigns. Now we've created a situation where if you create such economic disparity, people are going to go to where the resources are. So if NATO are constantly bombing the countries which aren't NATO, then they are inevitably going to be driving population to those NATO countries. You know, so a lot of the guilt is put on people in Australia, in England, in America, in Canada, in Ireland that, oh, well, you've got so much, why can't you share it with these people? Well, I mean, the counter argument to that is we've all got so much, why don't you stop bombing them and letting them live in their own houses, in their own countries peacefully and prosperously? Why do you feel the need to create these sort of situations? And you know, at the moment, people haven't got the language or the narrative to be able to counter the immigration argument. You know, it's a real disappointment, to be honest with you, that people don't point at that. I can see why they don't do it at a higher level, because they're paid by those banks and those people. But I think at a lower level, people are starting to see that the immigrants we're seeing. I did an artificial analysis on the nations that the immigrants are from in the hotels. And they're all from the countries in which our armed forces have been most active. Well, that's not just people looking for a better life. That's people that have been driven out of their countries as a result of economic war and hot wars, and probably have helped our governments oust the naturally elected leaders of those countries, like Imran Khan was in Pakistan, for example. You know, and as a result of that, they're bringing them over here and putting them in hotels and stuff. You know, and they're creating national security threat as a result of doing that. A lot of people, we've had a look at on the immigration one. I was talking to a counsellor that specialises in male suicide, and the male species is driven to suicide in 2 situations. Whenever a male is considered, it goes into that zone. When they dissect the conversation with them and they get to the root cause, it's one of 2 things. It's an existential threat to territory and the ability to provide. So that's why it's often linked to jobs and stuff. That's why a lot of farmers commit suicide when the land comes under threat. You get a high propensity, a high proportion of farmers, because the existential threat to their territory and their ability to provide. And the other one is an existential threat to your ability to reproduce, to have sex, have offspring. Right? And so when you have a look at it, you've taken people who can't speak a language, you've kettled them in hotels where they've got no prospects of a job and the ability to provide or gain territory. They've got no real prospects of being able to mate because they can't have a healthy conversation because they can't speak the language. So you're either driving these people to suicide, to crime in order to provide for themselves, or unconsensual intercourse in order to fulfill that instinctual need. So people are creating these hotbeds and then stepping back and going, oh, but you're not virtuous because you're not willing to have people here. People are very hospitable in their countries, but people have to understand that self-love is not something to feel guilty about. England should be English, Australia should be Australian, France should be French, and those nations need to look after their own populations first. And part of looking after our own populations is making sure that the taxation and everything else and the money and the resources of that country are going to better the population of that country in education and health, rather than bombing other countries as a result of funding NATO, the military-industrial complex, or whatever other aspects are driving the forces that keep places like the Holy Land in turmoil. So it goes into quite a large scope of conversation when we start to have a look at the weaponization of stuff, because it's at the core of narrative control and unhealthy narrative control. The ability to use guilt, particularly, to gaslight people and make them feel like they're doing the wrong thing by trying to stick up for themselves, as well as sticking up for other people.
Mm. Mm. So a return to love, a return
Definitely.
to self-love is the best love.
Definitely, and protecting other people's right to self-love.
Yes.
Right, so we love our nation, and we want other people to love their nations in a healthy way, to have pride in their cultures and their food and their architecture and everything that makes their nation fantastic. You know, it's a whole diverse selection. The diversity comes in allowing people to express their diversity in the nations they're in, and then through natural traveling and tourism and business, those cultures will naturally mix and experience each other. You don't need to fly aeroplanes of people and military aircraft from one war zone to another to force diversity. You know, so absolutely, it's a love and consciousness that's at a higher level that understands everyone has a right to survive. And so we have to start to get control of our own nations and stop that stuff. I know you have Ricardo Bossi in the United States that sort of, I think, is in a key sort of prominent position that has that sort of thinking as well. I don't know what the thoughts are of him on the show in Australia, but from sort of this far away on the other side of the world, you know, he's one person that I've seen that sort of is starting to challenge that NATO narrative and the wars and stuff, and you know, saying Australia needs to look after Australia and each nation needs to fight their own fight and get back control. So that's part of this challenge and the spectacle and the experience.
Wow.
Very good. Okay.
Any final thoughts, Jeff?
No, it's all good, mate. We'll get you back. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, and I
Yeah.
appreciate it. It's been a really good chat.
Yeah.
We'll get you
Yeah,
back.
I'm delighted. I think it was so engaging for me to listen to all the things that you've been talking about. And I know we've dipped in and out of each other's lives just over the last 5 years. And it's always fascinating to talk to you and great to hear what you're up to. And I'm delighted you came, and really delighted that we finish on self-love, best love. It's great.
Yeah.
With compassion. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you guys. Brilliant. Thank you to the audience and the viewers.
Yeah, very good.
Wow.
Okay.